My case is interesting because there is no victim. There's absolutely no victim. And initially, I was being arraigned in June of last year, and I simply wanted to walk into the arraignment and just simply say not guilty and just get a court date. Matter of fact, I didn't really even show up on time. I didn't have to do it, but since it was my arraignment, I wanted to go in and actually see it. Well, I'm there. And all of a sudden, the district attorney says that we need to slap a restraining order on me. I'm shocked by this. He says there are 2 escorts that claim that they're afraid for their very lives. They're just afraid to death to be around me. Their very lives are in jeopardy, so they got to have a restraining order. Well, we object to that, but the judge doesn't even want to hear it. Do you know it took us 2 court dates after that date to finally get a judge to say, all right, let's bring the witnesses in. I didn't even know who the escorts were. And finally, when we got them on the stand, do you know what? Under oath, they testified that I had never used force, never used threat of force, never physically obstructed anybody. They never heard of me doing anything like that. And one escort went as far as to say that I was nice in a passive-aggressive sort of way. Essentially what she's saying, when I'm standing in front of him, he'll say, pardon me, I'm going to the left, I'm going to the right, watch your step, I'm about to step forward. And that was a passive-aggressive sort of way of communicating with her. And she considered to be passive-aggressive simply because I was pro-life. Well, at that point, I thought the judge was just going to drop those charges because this is just ludicrous at this point. The escorts admit I've never used force, threat of force, or physically obstructed anybody. The escorts testified that I was nice. I've never done anything to them. I just know the judge is going to drop this. The escorts testified that it's their job, it's their duty. They're not afraid of me. They will stand in front of me, block my sign, and block my person any chance that they got to do their duty. I just know that this is going to be dropped. Finally, in desperation, the district attorney says, well, if you saw Mr. Hoye in a grocery store, would you be afraid of him? And the escort said, yes, I would be afraid of him if I saw him in a grocery store. So, Your Honor, there you have it. And the judge said, that's enough. And they put a restraining order on me from that moment on. Interesting, that restraining order lasted until my 13-day trial. So this is months now. So I've got about 4 or 5 or 6 pre-trial hearings. We're finally in December, and we're taking a look now at a 13-day trial. We bring the 2 escorts back to court because now I'm looking at 4 counts, and each count represents 1 year and a $2,000 fine. So altogether, I'm facing 4 years in jail and a $4,000 fine. Now, even though this is a misdemeanor, it still carries jail time, and it still carries a pretty hefty fine. Well, sure enough, the escorts give their same testimony, but only one of their charges is dropped. So I'm facing 3 now. The one they kept was this testimony. One of the escorts, the same one that said I was nice in a passive-aggressive sort of way, says that my low voice when she stands in front of me was indicative of an intimacy that was reserved for her husband. She said that his voice was so low and he's right behind me, and that's sort of an intimacy that's reserved for my husband. We've never been properly introduced. I really don't know him. He really doesn't know me. And so again, I'm sitting in court saying, oh, well, surely this charge is going to be dropped.
Of course.
But no, the judge felt that charge needed to be remain. So when I went into my sentencing, I had 3 charges now. We're taking a look at 3 years in jail and $6,000 worth of fine. Well, ultimately, they find me not guilty of that final escort charge, but they find me guilty of the 2 remaining charges, prohibited harassment. In other words, that I did have a sign. I was standing in front of an abortion clinic. I did have literature in my hand. As women walked by, maintain an 8-foot barrier, but I did have a conversation, and I said, good morning, may I talk to you about alternatives to the clinic? What you really need to understand is that there's not one woman, there's no victim in this crime. This just the clinic employees, just the clinic escorts who testified in court they don't like me. I drive them up the wall whenever I'm around, and they're the only ones complaining about it. Essentially, we put on videotape, and we showed the entire 4 hours of me in front of a clinic on 2 different days, April 29th and May 13th. We had videotape, not because I was videotaping myself breaking the law. Of course not. We were videotaping the behavior of the escorts. They're blocking my message. They're making it difficult for me to communicate. They're taking away my First Amendment rights. And so to prove it, we simply wanted to put it on tape. Well, we did. It just so happens, providentially, that this tape would be needed. And so while we're in court, we decide, oh, yes, let's enter this into evidence. We finally get it into evidence. That did take some doing. I've got great representation. The Life Legal Defense Foundation has just done an awesome job of representing me. So I want to say thank you to them and ask people to continue to support that organization. But it boiled down to this. Even after watching 4 hours of some agonizingly boring videotape of me standing in front of a sidewalk, the jury and the judge, this attorney, all agreed that I was guilty. And so I was convicted right there in court, even with videotape as my testimony. Essentially, I'm now convicted. And do you know, right there, the judge said, well, why don't we remand Mr. Hoye and hold him in jail until the sentencing, until we get around to it? Well, our lawyers pleaded with him, Your Honor, he's never had anything on his record. He's never been arrested. He's never had anything on his record whatsoever. There's just no justification for holding him in jail just till you get around to sentencing him. Well, the judge says, fine. Well, we're going to put a new stay-away order on him. The old one had expired. It was the end of the trial. What we're going to do is ask him to stay away 100 yards from the clinic until sentencing, and he has to stay away from the principals involved. In case the escorts, the employees, he can't be within 8 feet of them. Well, as it just turns out, my wife was in the hallway, and she overheard the pro-choice, the pro-abortion group, the pro-death group talking about how they were going to use the judge's stay-away order to literally chase me out the pulpit. You see, they could walk up to me, no problem there, but I have to move 8 feet away from them. And then not only were they going to come to my church, they were going to go to our march. Every January we have a march in Oakland. We march right down Oakland, and we carry our sign. We're trying to bring attention to this cause. And so they were going to come to my march and drive me away from our march so that I wouldn't be able to bring leadership to our march and rally in Oakland. Well, the judge heard that when my wife came back in and said, well, you know, that's not the intention of my order. So he changed it from a stay-away order to a no-contact order, which just simply means I can't call, I can't send them email, write them letters, which is absolutely no problem. I don't have contact with them like that anyway. So we agreed to that up until February 19th, where I was to be sentenced. Well, it's time for me to be sentenced now. I'm standing in court, and we're at the point where the judge says, is there anything else that you'd like to say before I pronounce sentence? Well, at that point, I stand up and I'm facing the judge, and you can hear a pin drop. See, this is significant because I've never said a word at all while I was in trial. I didn't have to testify. I had 2 days of videotape. You could see exactly what I was doing. You could see nobody was barred. Nobody was threatened. Everybody got to the clinic. They walked right on in. They walked right on by me. You could see exactly what was happening there. Well, this time I stood up, and the judge asked me would I like to say anything. And I said, yes, Your Honor. And I simply said this. I said, Your Honor, I believe that an unjust law is no law at all. And I believe that this law that I've been convicted of is an unjust law, and that it is my intention to continue reaching the men and women going into the clinic with the love of Jesus Christ from here on out. And the judge was simply stunned at that point. You could see that he was shaken. Ultimately, he cleared the court. He went back in his chambers, came back out, said that he didn't need my permission. to sentence me, and so he did. He said, "Mr. Hoye, I'm sentencing you to 3 years probation. I'm sentencing you to a 100-yard stay-away order. I'm sentencing you to a $1,130 fine. I'm sentencing you to 30 days in jail, which you can serve in 3 different ways. You can actually do the straight jail time. You can volunteer for the Sheriff's Work Program and pick up trash on the freeway, or you could do community service that we'll approve of." And so he said, "Mr. Hoye, would you agree to those terms of probation?" And I said, "No, Your Honor, I will not agree to those terms of probation." I had already made up in my mind that this was a horrible violation of my First Amendment rights. I'm not guilty, and I was no longer just going to voluntarily surrender my constitutional rights to this judge.